Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. Is the Indo-US nuclear deal in danger of being rejected by the US Senate or brutally amended? And if so, what can the Indian government do about it? That's the key question that I shall put today in an exclusive interview to the Indian Foreign Secretary, Shyam Saran. Foreign Secretary, you spent last week in Washington trying to promote the Indo-US nuclear deal, but the problem, as the LA Times put it on the 31st of March, and I'll quote, is that the deal has met a chilly reception from lawmakers who are predicting that instead of swift approval, the initiative faces revisions and delays, if not outright rejection. And worse still, according to Associated Press, when Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice briefed the two committees of the Houses, she was met with considerable skepticism. Are you worried?
No, I don't think I'm worried at all, because when I was in Washington and I met a number of very key legislators, both from the Democratic Party as well as from the Republican Party, I did not receive a chilly reception. I was told that this was a very important element of the emerging relationship between India and the US, that there were questions that needed to be answered, but that in view of the very great importance which was attached to Indo-US relations, in fact, the congressmen were ready to see this very seriously.
All right, that means let's explore the extent to which this reception was chilly, the extent to which the reception that you personally got was polite. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Richard Lugar, and the chairman of the House International Relations Committee, Congressman Henry Hyde, have both maintained a careful, deliberate and studied neutrality. Given that their committees have to endorse this deal, this clearly isn't a good sign.
No, I think there is a misreading of the way the American Congress works. These are chairmen. Chairmen are supposed to be quite neutral.
The chairmen give nudges to their committees. No nudges being given here.
How do you know that no nudges have been given to them?
Because it would have been picked up by the American press.
Not necessarily.
The American press itself has commented that this studied neutrality is a sign of rejection.
I would go more by my own discussions with the various congressmen.
You met Senator Lugar.
Yes,
what did he say to you?
Well, okay, when I met Senator Lugar, this was not on this visit to Washington, but during my last visit to Washington. And I found that Senator Lugar was quite positive.
Why did you not meet him this time around?
Well, I was meeting several others whom I had not met earlier.
Was he unavailable to you?
No, I don't think he was unavailable to me. I had only
try
a short period of time where I needed to meet a number of senators, both on the Republican side as well as the Democratic side, and that was just for one day.
Did you meet Congressman Henry Hyde?
Yes, I did. Yes.
What indication did he give you? Will he
Again, he said that he had a certain role as a chairman, but that he attached great importance to India-US relations, and I could be certain that in the consideration of this particular proposal, that particular perspective will be borne in mind.
But is that equivalent to endorsing the deal, or is it simply staying neutral and saying nothing very much?
Let me make a very important point to you. I think no one in the American Congress wants to be seen as merely stamping a text that has been handed over to them by the administration. That is now not how they see their role. I think it's the same with the Indian Parliament. They would also like to debate the
So you're saying respect the independence of the American Congress, but don't misread it and interpret it as opposition.
I think we are a democracy. We have had a debate in our own country over this deal. I think we should not be surprised that there should be a debate in the United States, which is also a democracy.
All right, that answer applies to the responses of the chairman of the two important House committees. What about so-called friends of India? Hillary Clinton, Congresswoman Ross Lehtinen, Congressman Ed Royce, all of whom are either present chairmen of the India caucus or past chairs of the India caucus. None of them have endorsed the deal. Their silence is ominous.
I'm not really worried about individual congressmen. I think what is very important is that there should be bipartisan support for this initiative.
Except that these are the people...
And if you look at the testimony of the Secretary of State Rice to the House of Representatives and to the Senate, you will see that there was considerable amount of bipartisan support for this initiative.
Except for the fact that people like Hillary Clinton, Ross Lehtinen and Ed Royce should have been out there batting for you. They're not. They are your friends. They should have been leading support for the deal. Their silence suggests opposition.
Well, they may have good reasons for their silence, but as long as we have a a large number of congressmen on both sides of the party divide who are supporting us. Why should we be?
So this silence doesn't worry you?
It doesn't worry me.
What about the fact that Ed Markey has tabled a resolution specifically trying to kill off the deal? Not only has he got 18 people as supporters and co-sponsors, but 10 of those 18 are members of the India caucus.
Well, there are several members of the India caucus who are also members of the Pakistan caucus.
So it's not much of an India caucus then?
I don't really pay much attention to that
Except that it means it's not much of an India caucus.
I think it is very important that we have a sufficiently large number of influential congressmen from both parties who are behind this. And this is what will see us through.
What about something else? Practically all the important American papers have spoken out strongly against the deal. The New York Times, the LA Times, the Boston Globe, USA Today, even The Economist. The Washington Post, I admit, is lukewarm, but not a single American major paper has come out in support of the deal. Doesn't that worry you?
It doesn't worry me, because this would not be the first time that there are propositions before the Congress and which are not supported by the American press. So I think, again, I would go by our own independent assessment.
Which is?
Of what the sentiment is in the Congress. One, that congressmen, senators wish to have a debate over this initiative, and that is quite legitimate.
And second?
Second, they can raise issues, they can raise questions. It just so happens that we have the answers to the issues that they are raising, to the questions that they are raising. Therefore, we are confident that this can have support, bipartisan support in the Congress.
What about the fact that Congressman Gary Ackerman has twice gone on record to say that George Bush as president is doing a terrible job trying to sell this deal to both the US Congress and the American people? Now, his role is critical, but if he's doing a terrible job, he's letting you down.
I don't know on what basis this assessment is being made. I think if you look at the reports over the last couple of weeks, President Bush, in various meetings he has been having, even in the small towns in America, has been batting for this deal.
Can I interrupt?
And you have just had the Secretary of State Rice, who has made, I think, a very, very persuasive testimony before the Congress.
Except that Associated Press reported within hours that her testimony had been received with considerable skepticism. The Washington Post said that it had raised so many questions, so many areas of doubt, that it could take months to clear up.
That's simply not true. I have seen the question and answer session in the Congress after the testimony.
Let's come back.
And the assessment that I come to is that, in fact, after this testimony, the deal has much better chance of going through the Congress.
Let's come back to President Bush. Are you, as Foreign Secretary of India, happy with the way he is supporting, promoting, and trying to get support for this deal?
I think it is critical.
But are you happy with the way he's doing it?
Yes, because I think that as President of the United States, if he is seen as being fully behind this initiative, and he is investing such a lot of political capital in getting this initiative through, I think that sends a message.
What about the fact that his ratings are perhaps down to as low as 29%, and it is already being said in the papers that Democratic congressmen do not want to give him a foreign policy triumph weeks or months ahead of the November elections?
That is precisely the reason why I said it is extremely important that there should be a bipartisan support and consensus behind this initiative.
But that bipartisan support is missing.
No.
The Democrats are against it.
This is why I said it is very important for you to really look at the question and answer session after the testimony was made in the Congress. And in that, if you look at the question and answer session, there are several people belonging to the Democratic Party who have come out fully in support, unambiguously in support of this initiative.
In which case, let me ask you a blunt question. Are you confident that this deal will be passed by both houses of Congress in a way that is acceptable to the Indian government before the November elections, before Congress adjourns for its election recess?
I'm not an astrologer, but I think I'm very optimistic that what will happen.
Optimistic or confident?
Okay, I will be confident.
You don't sound very confident about being confident.
Listen, there are always, in politics, there are always uncertainties.
So you're acknowledging...
So I have to make a best assessment possible given the current situation. I don't know how the politics will evolve in the coming weeks.
If the deal isn't passed by this Congress and gets pushed to the 110th Congress, which gets elected after November, where everyone expects that the Republican Party could lose its majority, perhaps in one house, perhaps in both, would you concede that then, with a Democratic majority in both houses, the deal is dead?
Look, what I would say to that is, the earlier we get this through, the better it is.
All right, in that case, let's turn to the depth of concern that you face in Congress. and how you're tackling it. The first concern is the belief that this deal blows a bomb-sized hole through America's non-proliferation legislation, which makes a mockery of its Iran and North Korea present policies, and which could perhaps provide a precedent for other countries to follow suit. How do you tackle that?
All the comments that you have made relate to nuclear weapons. This is not a deal about India's strategic program. This is a deal about civil nuclear energy cooperation between India and the United States.
Except for the fact that congressmen say that India 30 years ago made itself a rogue state when it used Canadian technology, American heavy water to carry out a controlled nuclear implosion. Is it being rewarded for its rogue behavior today?
It just so happens that we do not agree with that version of history. And if you look at the July 18 joint statement, it starts off by acknowledging that India has an impeccable record as far as non-proliferation is concerned.
So you're saying that this concern that the deal smashes to smithereens America's very valued non-proliferation regime is actually a concern that you think you can allay?
It is a totally misplaced concern.
A second concern that's come up in Congress is that this deal doesn't do enough to curb or control or contain India's nuclear weaponry. Worse, it makes substantial amounts of uranium available for military purposes, which perhaps weren't available to India earlier.
I repeat, this is a deal which is not about India's nuclear weapons. Okay. As far as having a large amount of local uranium or indigenous uranium being available for weapons purposes is concerned, I think the same people have been giving the argument that more and more of India's reactors should be brought under safeguards. If more reactors are brought under safeguards, more uranium will come from outside. Would they be happier if we had fewer reactors offered for safeguards?
So you're saying there's an inherent illogic in this criticism. You can't say you want more reactors under safeguards and at the same time complain that indigenous uranium is being freed up for ostensibly military purposes. You either can have one or the other.
Isn't that apparent?
Did you make that point to congressmen?
Well, I did not make that point to the congressman because this was not raised with me in those terms.
But if it is, will you make it?
I did certainly make the point to them that this is an agreement about civil nuclear energy cooperation. There is nothing in India's record to show that there has been a lack of restraint or responsibility as far as our strategic program.
And did they buy that answer?
Yes, they did.
Major voices in America, Jimmy Carter, Bob Einhorn, John Kerry, Thomas Friedman, are saying that the deal would be considerably more acceptable if India would accept a permanent ban on the production of fissile material. They argue that all the major nuclear powers have accepted this or are implementing it. Do you completely rule that out?
We have already committed ourselves to negotiating in good faith on a multilateral, verifiable fissile material cutoff treaty at the Geneva Conference on Disarmament.
So what about accepting a cutoff on fissile production now, today, as a way of getting the deal through in the next 4 months?
I think we have made it very clear that that is not acceptable, and you have Secretary Rice's testimony in the Congress saying that India will not accept such.
You also were quoted in the Indian papers as saying that India might be prepared to consider changes provided they were within what you described the parameters of the original understanding. Let me try and run a couple of ideas past you. Would you be prepared, for instance, to accept that India wouldn't build fresh military reactors other than the 8 that under this deal are about to be designated as military purpose reactors? No new ones.
No, I think it is very important to remember that whatever we have agreed upon is the result of very, very difficult, very tough negotiations.
So no new changes.
What we have at this point of time is an extremely carefully, delicately balanced understanding. And when I said that it must remain, whatever legislation is passed, must remain within those parameters, I also expressed the strong hope that revisions will not be made.
So India cannot accept any revisions regardless of whether a Jimmy Carter or a Bob Einhorn or a John Kerry recommend them. You cannot accept any changes, even if that might help Congress pass the deal.
The reality, political reality is that what we have been able to achieve, the balance of obligations that are enshrined in the understanding that we have with the United States, is something which is very delicately balanced.
So the deal is sacrosanct, not a word, not a comma can be changed. That's in effect what you're saying.
This is putting it in those terms is perhaps missing the point. I think what is very important to understand, and this is something which also Secretary Rice has put forward before the Congress, is that this is a very, very carefully balanced agreement. Please do not disturb it.
In other words, what you're saying to Congressman through this interview is don't tinker with the deal. You won't improve matters. You'll probably unravel it.
It could happen. But as I mentioned to each and every congressman and senator I met, you have the right to debate this deal. You have the right to raise questions. You have the right to ask for clarifications. It just so happens that I'm very confident that we can provide you with the satisfactory answers, that we can give you the clarifications.
But don't demand substantive changes. You've also added that.
Yes, that's true.
In which case, we have here a classic impasse, a standoff between the Indian position and possibly that of the Congress. Many people in America believe the deal simply won't pass without substantive changes. You're saying to me those substantive changes would be unacceptable to India.
Not one single congressman or senator I met mentioned anything about asking for amendments.
Except that a moment ago I quoted the LA Times, and the LA Times said that in fact lawmakers were saying that the deal will face revisions, delays, if not outright rejection.
I repeat, Karan, every senator or congressman I met said that India-US relations was extremely important for them. No one mentioned the word amendment.
If the deal doesn't go through, and as you said, you're not an astrologer, you can't predict it, so it's clearly a possibility. How much of a setback to Indo-US relations would that be?
Well, you know, Indo-US relations has acquired a very broad-ranging character. There are several important components to this relationship, and this happens to be one of the components. However, this also happens to be the component on which there is very intense focus. And therefore, if this particular deal does not go through, naturally, there will be a sense of, failed expectations. There will be a loss of enthusiasm, and this may have an impact on other aspects of our relations.
And it could be a serious impact, because no one can predict how impacts go.
Yes, I mean, there is also always a unpredictability about these things, but I would say that, you know, the logic behind the kind of broad-ranging character that India-US relations have acquired, that logic will not disappear.
Foreign Secretary, let's take a break. Let's come back after the break and talk about concerns that have arisen in India. How do you as Foreign Secretary tackle those? That's the subject in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an exclusive interview with the Foreign Secretary of India, Shyam Saran. Foreign Secretary, let's turn to domestic concerns that have arisen in India. It's emerged that the waiver authority requires the US President to certify that India has not detonated a nuclear explosive device. Do you accept that this converts India's revocable and voluntary ban on testing into a legally binding and permanent ban, and worse, one that's now enforced by the United States and not voluntarily by India on itself?
The voluntary commitment remains. What you have is a reference to a US law which says that US law requires that if there is a partner which detonates an explosive device, then cooperation will come to an end. That is part of US law.
Except
that is not part of a bilateral understanding between India and the
Except for the fact that once you've invested billions of dollars in creating nuclear reactors as a result of the Indo-US deal, and then India were to go and test, and the US were to suddenly stop supplies, your money in the billions would have been wasted. Your nuclear reactors would be starved of fuel.
But this is nothing new. I mean, this has always been part of US law. So what is new in this?
Except for the fact that
we have gone
up till now, you have a right to resume testing whenever you want. Once this new deal goes through, under the waiver authority, it will no longer be up to you. It will be a condition imposed by the American government.
As far as cooperation with the United States is concerned, this law has always been there. It is not a new law. It is not with reference to specifically India.
Let me ask you this. After the Indo-US deal comes into force, and after your revocable ban becomes what I call a permanent ban on testing, if Pakistan and China...
It is not a permanent ban on testing. You are making a mistake.
If Pakistan...
In the India-US joint statement, there is a reference to a moratorium being maintained by India, not to a permanent
Let me finish my question.
So please, I think you are making...
If after the Indo-US treaty comes into force, if China and Pakistan were to test, what would India do?
Well, if you look at the US-China nuclear energy cooperation agreement. In that too, cooperation between China and the US is only for peaceful purposes, and those peaceful purposes also include not testing any explosive device.
Yes, but you are answering with reference to China. I asked a question about India. If China or Pakistan were to test a nuclear device after the Indo-US deal comes into force, will India also test or will India not?
That is a decision that will have to be made at that particular point of time.
The problem is, if you do test, you lose American supplies. That's the problem.
That is a decision you have to make. It is
so
not that
to run the risk.
It is not a condition which has been imposed as something specific to India.
But suddenly there's a risk. Now if you test after the deal comes into force, you lose supplies from America.
Of course there is a risk, but this is not a risk which is something which has been introduced surreptitiously. This has been part of US law for many years.
You factored it into your own consideration.
Of course it has been factored into our calculations.
A second element of a ban on testing is that the quality of your deterrent could be affected. Since a similar ban on testing has not been imposed on Pakistan, over a period of time, the quality of India's deterrent vis-a-vis that of Pakistan could deteriorate. Doesn't that worry you?
Again, Karan, I think it is very important to accept that we are not talking here about an arms control agreement. We are not talking here about India's
But the waiver authority has implications for your deterrent.
The waiver authority does not have any kind of reference to India's strategic program. There is a reference to a law which has been on the books of the US for many years.
Foreign Secretary,
everybody knows about that law.
The question I asked was different. The question I asked is that if there is a ban, whether it's imposed voluntarily or by US law on India testing, then that will have implications for the quality of India's deterrent. And let me finish and then answer it. And in those circumstances where Pakistan doesn't have a similar ban, India's deterrent over a period of time could deteriorate vis-a-vis Pakistan.
When you carried out tests in 1998, weren't a whole series of sanctions put on you?
So were they or not? So we're prepared to live with those tests forevermore. Forevermore.
Whether you have a moratorium or you don't have a moratorium, if you were to test an explosive device tomorrow, there will be exactly the same reaction as you have had in 1998.
So once again you're saying
therefore, in 1998, you took a very conscious decision that despite the fact that this is what would happen, it was important for you to take the step. I think in the future it will be exactly the same.
What you're saying in effect is that the concerns that have been brought up by former Prime Minister Vajpayee are baseless?
I think Prime Minister Vajpayee, when he referred to the waiver, there is a factual problem here, because as far as China is concerned, because he has compared the waiver that is being given to India with the waiver given to China, frankly, India and China are not on the same status. China is a nuclear weapon state under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It does not require a waiver.
What about the point that he makes that a ban on testing could have an impact on the quality of India's deterrent? Are you saying that's baseless too?
That is something which is a separate question.
And it's factored in?
That is a separate question, and that has very little to do with the civilian nuclear energy cooperation agreement in which you are in.
One other thing. Former Deputy National Security Advisor Satish Chandra and Brahmchalani, one of India's best-known nuclear experts, both believe that the language of the waiver authority rules out all subcritical tests. Did you seek clarification from America about that?
No, we have not sought any clarification because the definition of a nuclear explosive device does not include subcritical tests.
So you believe that in fact subcritical tests are still possible without incurring the loss of the waiver?
I do not think that it is necessary for me to go into a discussion about India's strategic program.
No, but you're saying, I'm asking a simple question. Can subcritical tests happen?
My answer to that is precisely what I said, that the definition of nuclear explosive device does not include this class of tests.
You're absolutely confident?
Yes.
Absolutely?
Yes.
But you haven't double-checked it with the Americans?
Why should I double-check with the Americans?
Let me end by putting this to you. India is committed, as the language goes, to a credible minimum nuclear deterrent. Does the Indo-US nuclear deal damage the credibility of that deterrent, whilst oddly enough, guaranteeing its minimality?
You have seen that in the negotiations, we have had representatives of the Department of Atomic Energy, who are, in a sense, the guardians of this deterrence. We have done nothing which remotely has given them any sense of anxiety. You have had the chairman of the Department of Atomic Energy coming out publicly and saying this is a good deal. I think why should there be any anxieties on this score?
One other question. It's not just that the Americans are tightening the screws or trying to on India's nuclear deterrent at the moment. They've also said that they will continue this process even after the deal falls into place. Let me quote you Under Secretary of State Robert Joseph. Rather than add conditions today, he says, we believe it would be better to lock in this deal and then seek to achieve further results as our strategic partnership advances. Will America be constantly tightening the screw on India?
Why are we always so worried about screws being tightened on us? You know, I mean, I find that there is such a lack of confidence in our own ability to preserve our own positions, as if, someone can just come and turn the screws on us and we just lie back and be screwed. Why should there be such an assumption? I think if you look at the negotiations that have taken place for this particular deal, I think we have done rather well for ourselves.
In which case,
we have preserved all our basic positions. We have preserved our basic interests. I see no reason why there should be this kind of a anxiety that somehow or the other we are always vulnerable to pressure.
In a word, have you sacrificed India's defense security to secure a nuclear deal with America?
No.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
100% no.
100% no.
Foreign Secretary.